Welcome to today's deep dive. We have a pretty fascinating mission ahead of us today, and it's one that might actually fundamentally alter the way you interact with the books sitting on your shelf.
Oh, absolutely. It really changes the entire perspective on reading.
Right. So we are looking at a stack of manifestos written by Safa Kaçmaz, and our goal today is to unpack his incredibly unique, somewhat radical literary philosophy. It's known as the bodily sociogonic school of poetry.
Yes, and we're going to explore how KAÇMAZ'S takes the concept of art and turns it from something you just passively consume into a physical weight that literally alters your biology.
You know, usually when we think about poetry, there's this expectation of delicacy. We picture beautifully chosen words on a pristine white page, carefully arranged to sound pleasing to the ear. It's like light, it's airy.
It's treated as an object of beauty, something you appreciate from a comfortable, safe distance, maybe while drinking tea in a cozy armchair.
Exactly, an aesthetic treat. But Kaçmaz's manifestos demand a profound shift in that understanding.
He methodically deconstructs everything we thought poetry was supposed to be. And over the course of this deep dive, we are going to trace his logic step by step.
Starting with his total rejection of traditional poetic structures.
Right. And then moving into his incredibly visceral views on how time and pain dictate human existence, and finally arriving at his overarching philosophy of sociogony,
which places the human being at the absolute, undisputed center of all creation. But to really grasp what Kaçmaz thinks poetry is, we have to start with what he violently rejects.
His disdain for what he calls façade poetry is practically leaping off the page.
Yeah, reading through these, he argues that traditionally writing a poem is treated like constructing a fancy building. A poet works on the exterior, polishing the words, arranging the meanings perfectly so that the outside looks stunning to anyone walking by.
And he admits this kind of poetry generates a lot of admiration. But, and this is key, he views that admiration as entirely hollow.
Hollow because it doesn't actually touch you.
Exactly. He compares that traditional approach to looking at a priceless artifact inside a glass case at a museum. You can walk up to the glass, you can study the craftsmanship, you can turn to the person next to you and remark on how beautiful it is.
But you can't touch it.
Right, you can't touch it. The glass case protects the art, but it permanently isolates the viewer. You are forever locked on the outside of the experience.
And Kaçmaz despises that isolation. He argues that facade poetry is something you look at and then just walk away from, totally unchanged.
His entire school of thought is built on the premise that words should never, ever be treated as mere decorations or building blocks for a pretty exterior.
That makes me think about how we usually interact with art. Traditional poetry is like watching a magnificent lightning storm from safely inside your living room window. You can appreciate the power, but you're insulated.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. Insulated.
But Kaçmaz essentially wants you standing barefoot in a puddle holding a copper pipe. He wants the barrier removed completely so the current passes right through you.
The copper pipe metaphor captures his intent perfectly. He wants a direct, uninsulated transfer of energy. And the way he achieves that transfer begins with how he fundamentally redefines the concept of the word itself.
Because, aren't poems just made of words? How do you avoid words becoming a facade?
Well, in the bodily sociogonic school, a word is not an external tool you use to point at an idea. A word is existence itself. In his writings, he insists that when you encounter a word in his poetry, you do not read it. You certainly don't learn it.
You remember it.
You remember it, because the feeling the word represents is already coded into your biology. Kaçmaz argues that the word is already your internal and external color.
I really want to dig into the mechanics of that because it's a wild concept. If we break down the logic, it implies that the poet isn't actually teaching you anything new.
Right, they aren't handing you a new piece of intellectual information.
They are acting as a trigger for a human experience you've already had, or a biological reality you already possess but maybe just couldn't articulate.
Exactly. The poet isn't a mason laying bricks for a facade. The poet is an excavator. Poetry, in this framework, isn't something built from scratch.
It's just uncovering what's already there.
Yes, it's the sudden uncovering of what is already buried inside the human being. Because human biology and the capacity for suffering or joy are universal, the raw material of the poem already exists within you. The poet just provides the specific frequency that makes it resonate.
Okay, so if these words, these heavy truths, are already inside us, just waiting to be excavated, where exactly are they originating?
Kaçmaz's answer to that is unapologetically biological. It's the physical body.
Which is fascinating because traditionally the body is just the instrument, right?
Yes, this is perhaps the most crucial pillar of this philosophy. In standard literary criticism, the mind is the seat of genius, the source of the inspiration, and the body is just the delivery mechanism, the hand holding the pen, the vocal cords vibrating to speak.
But KAÇMAZ flips that hierarchy completely.
He does. For him, the body is not the tool. The body is the source.
He is incredibly literal about this in the text. He describes poetry as actual tears, as blood, as sweat. He says it's the smell of a flower, the sudden paralyzing feeling of fear, the physiological rush of courage.
It's intensely physical.
Think about the last time you read a text message that delivered some terrible news, and your stomach instantly dropped or your heart started pounding. According to KAÇMAZ'S, that wasn't just you processing information, that was a physical transfer.
It's the difference between drawing a picture of a fire and actually pressing a burning coal into someone's palm.
Yes, if you hand someone a burning coal, you aren't communicating the abstract idea of heat. You are transferring the physical reality of a burn.
And KAÇMAZ'S argues that concepts like pain shouldn't be treated as abstract literary themes to be pondered over a cup of tea. Pain is an actual physical wound.
Right.
Poetry, as he vividly describes it, is the literal leaking out of the body. The body is overflowing because it can no longer contain the sheer intensity of the lived experience.
But if the body is leaking these experiences, what dictates how that happens? It can't just be a passive process where the poet sits back and lets the emotion drain out of them, right?
No, it is intensely active. KAÇMAZ'S introduces the concept of tessing, or confronting. He explicitly states that his poetry does not just talk about death or describe trauma from a safe philosophical distance.
It tests it.
It tests death.
Yeah.
It forces, it opens, it actively wrenches experiences apart rather than just passively accepting them. An experience isn't just recorded in a journal, it is ripped open so the poet, and consequently the reader, can see its guts.
So we have this violent, incredibly physical confrontation with life. The body is leaking its experiences, ripping open concepts like pain and mortality.
Yeah.
But all of this intense physical reality is happening inside a very specific, unforgiving constraint. And that constraint is time.
KAÇMAZ'S view of time is simultaneously tragic and brutally concrete. Much like he rejects abstract decorative words, he completely rejects the abstract philosophical concept of time.
Right, time isn't some ethereal river flowing endlessly into the infinite future.
No, time exists in the physical ticking of a watch.
And he makes this beautiful, stark observation that the ticking of a watch is actually just a mechanical representation of a heartbeat.
It's chilling, really. Tearing a page off a calendar isn't just tracking the days of the week. You are literally tearing away a piece of a life.
Every tick, every torn page is an ending. For KAÇMAZ'S, time does not progress, it only decreases.
It only decreases.
So if time is just a relentless countdown, and we are just these physical bodies reacting to pain and love as the clock ticks down towards zero, when do we actually figure out what our lives mean? When do we get to process that burning coal we're holding?
We don't. At least not while we are holding it. This is where KAÇMAZ'S introduces his heartbreaking theory of delayed understanding.
Delayed understanding.
He posits that human beings are fundamentally incapable of understanding an experience while they are living it.
Because you're too close to it. Your brain is entirely occupied with just surviving the heat of the moment.
Exactly. When you are inside a burning building, you don't sit down to analyze the thermal dynamics of the flame. You just burn. You just try to survive.
Right.
KAÇMAZ'S uses love as the prime example. He argues that love is not truly known while it is being lived. The full weight and shape of love is only comprehensively understood the moment it is lost.
Wow. You only realize the true dimensions of the thing by studying the empty space it leaves behind in your life.
That is the essence of delayed understanding. And because of this inherent human lag, this gap between experiencing something and understanding it, poetry is never a completed, tidy package.
It's a half-finished comprehension.
It is the ultimate language of delayed realization. You write the poem, or you remember the poem, in the aftermath of the survival.
The poem is the echo of the experience, finally reaching the conscious mind after the body has already absorbed the impact.
Exactly.
And because delayed understanding of pain and the relentless ticking clock of time apply to every single human body equally, KAÇMAZ'S realizes that all our political, social, and ideological divisions are just artificial distractions.
A tearing calendar page doesn't care about your political party. A physical wound doesn't have an ideology. The bodily sociogonic school is strictly non-ideological.
And it's important to clarify for the listener that we aren't endorsing any specific worldview here, either left-wing or right-wing. We are just impartially examining his framework based on the source text.
Of course. And in his framework, poetry takes no sides. It uses no slogans. It builds no lines of defense. If it's pain, it's just pain.
It's this pure, unadulterated focus on the raw human condition that leads us to the biggest, most sweeping concept in his manifestos. The term he coined himself to tie all of this together, sociogony.
Sociogony.
Let's break that word down. Socio obviously refers to society, and gony means the origin or creation of something. Like cosmogony is the study of the creation of the universe.
Right.
So by combining them, KAÇMAZ'S is placing the human being at the absolute undeniable origin point of both society and art. We are the center of the universe.
In sociogony, the human is not a passive subject who just accepts the world as it is handed down by history or nature. The human is the active, restless creator of belief.
Everything from our economic structures to our most deeply held cultural meaning.
KAÇMAZ'S even includes the concept of gods in this. They are forms of meaning, built, shaped, and ultimately destroyed by human beings. We are the authors of the entire social reality.
We are just renting a room in the house of society. We built the foundation, the walls, and the roof.
And because humans are the ultimate active creators of society, they are naturally the creators of poetry. But under the lens of sociogony, this means poetry isn't just an individual's private venting session.
It's not a secret diary entry hidden under a mattress.
Poetry is the most concentrated, dense form of our shared social existence. It is the very fabric of human creation condensed into language. When a society transforms, its poetry must transform because they both emanate from the exact same central source.
Lived human experience. So if the human is this powerful central creator, and poetry is this raw, lived experience literally leaking out of the physical body because it's too heavy to carry anymore, where does that experience ultimately go? The energy has to transfer somewhere.
That is the crux of the entire bodily sociogonic school. KAÇMAZ'S poses the ultimate question. Can a physical experience actually be transferred from one body to another?
Telling a story through mere description always leaves something out, right?
Always. You can describe a cold room, but you can't make someone shiver with adjectives alone. So the goal of this poetry isn't to tell. The goal is to transfer.
The word he uses in the original text is aktarmen transfer, or transmission.
Yes.
The poet experiences something, a devastating loss, or a sudden, terrifying realization that creates a literal biological weight in their body. The poem becomes the vehicle for that weight.
And this framework brings the responsibility directly to you, the reader. When you engage with this kind of poetry, you are no longer just an audience member safely admiring a museum piece.
You are conscripted.
You become what KAÇMAZ'S calls the second carrier.
Second carrier. Think of it like walking down the street and someone collapses in front of you, shoving a heavy ironclad briefcase into your arms. You didn't ask for it, you didn't pack it, but now you're holding it.
You feel the strain in your own muscles.
The weight pulling down on your own shoulders. The poet experienced something so overwhelming that their body could no longer endure it alone, so they bled it out into a poem entirely for the purpose of physically handing that weight over to you.
This leads to KAÇMAZ'S most radical conclusion about the nature of art. The poem does not end on the page. In fact, it isn't even finished by the poet.
Wow.
The poem is actually completed inside the reader. It requires your nervous system, your biology, to finish the transfer. KAÇMAZ'S declares that poetry is not written, it is lived. It ends its life in one body, only to immediately restart its life in another.
That fundamentally changes how you look at a bookshelf. It's no longer a collection of entertaining stories or clever wordplay.
No, it's a collection of transferred burdens waiting in stasis for a second carrier to pick them up. It demands your active participation. You are feeling the delayed realization of someone else's decreasing time.
You cannot remain passive in the face of this kind of art. It forces us to reckon with the very nature of human empathy and connection.
It really asks if we are genuinely brave enough to carry the weight of another person's unfiltered existence.
What an incredibly dense, visceral philosophy. Let's do a quick recap of the journey we just took through the bodily sociogonic school. First, KAÇMAZ'S takes a sledgehammer to the decorative facade of traditional poetry, shattering that glass case.
Right. Second, he centers the physical body not as the pen, but as the bleeding source of the creation itself.
Third, he strips away all artificial ideology to focus purely on the universal human condition. Pain, fear, courage, all framed by the tragedy of a ticking watch.
Decreasing time and our constant delayed understanding of our own lives.
And finally, He crowns the human as the active creator of all societal meaning through sociogony, which culminates in the ultimate transfer of experience from the poet's body directly into the reader as the second carrier. It is raw, it is intense, and once you understand the mechanics of it, it is entirely impossible to ignore.
It is a philosophy that redefines the stakes of reading and writing, elevating it from an intellectual exercise to an act of biological survival and shared endurance.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. We spent a lot of time talking about KAÇMAZ'S concept of delayed understanding, the idea that you can't truly comprehend an experience like love or pain until after it's over because your body is too busy just surviving it in the moment.
Yeah.
Now consider that against our modern world. We live in a society obsessed with instant reactions. We live stream our lives. We post our thoughts the second an event happens. We demand immediate hot takes on every tragedy or triumph before the dust has even settled.
Oh, constantly.
If KAÇMAZ is right, and true understanding can only ever exist in the aftermath, what does it mean that we have built a culture completely addicted to the immediate present? Are we permanently locking ourselves out of ever truly understanding our own lives simply because we refuse to wait for the delay?
That's a really haunting question.
Keep that in mind the next time you feel the urge to instantly react to a burning coal instead of letting it cool enough to finally see its shape.